Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Safiyyah, your host. Were women in early Muslim communities intended to remain secluded from public life, or did the Quran imagine something different? We're looking at that now as part of our series. We are exploring the series by al-Halim Abu Shuqqah, in which he talks about Muslim women's rights and how those have been misunderstood. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
So, Dr. Shabir, on this subject, Abu Shuqqah suggests that the Quran imagines or envisions Muslim women as being a very active participant in public and social life. So maybe you can speak about that a little bit, Dr. Shabir.
Yes, he cited several verses of the Quran which show that women are being directly addressed by God. They are given responsibilities similar to the responsibilities of men. They're not treated like as an adjunct to their male relatives when it comes to, like, for example, migration for the sake of God, which many Muslims had to endure. Women are treated as independent migrants, especially those who left the polytheistic background and separated from their families for that reason and decided to join the Muslim community to uphold the monotheistic faith. In all of these ways, the Quran speaks to women and of women as independent persons, not just simply subsumed within their families.
Mm-hmm. I believe the Quran mentions that women are to pledge allegiance, right? It doesn't just mention men or just people in general, but it specifically mentions believing women.
Yes. There's a particular verse, chapter 60, verse number 12, and the chapter itself is called Suratul Mumtahana, the woman who is to be put to a test or who is to pass the qualifier. So this is a reference in verse 12 to the women who had precisely, as I mentioned, separated themselves from their families because their families remained polytheists, and these women wanted to join the monotheistic community. So they migrated. That would mean that they traveled, from Mecca, their hometown, all the way to Medina, which is some 400 kilometers to the north of Mecca. And in those days, if you think about the dangers of traveling and the primitive means of transportation, with all of their difficulties and so on, and exposure to heat and the cool at night and the changing weather conditions and blowing sand and dealing with highway robbers and all of that. So in that environment, you imagine women traveling, and the Quran, does not condemn that. It does not say, okay, well, wait a minute, these women should have stayed at home, stayed with their families, and we're just concerned with the men, and the women just fall into line with whatever their husbands decide. No, the Quran's vision for women is different in that the women have a great degree of independence and they can decide their own futures. And if they wanted to join the new faith, they're free to do so.
It's interesting that Abu Shuqqah mentioned this in his series because I don't think I've ever heard anyone explicate it in this way.
Yeah, well, one of the things that is very interesting in Abu Shuqqah's book is that we find a number of books which are written in present times and have been written over the last several decades. By persons who are trying to show, well, Islam already guaranteed the rights of women.
Yes.
So those books tend to reflect a certain complacency. Don't worry about it, don't chase after the progress of the supposed progress of the modern world. Just recognize that Islam already gave women all of the rights. But Abu Shuqqah's book is taking a different tack by saying, wait a minute, there are rights which have been neglected.
Yes.
And that's what we need to bring back. So this is to shake us out of our complacency. So it makes a world of difference. Yes. He also highlights a verse from the 9th chapter of the Quran, Surah 9, verse number 71, I believe the verse number is. Al-mu'minina wal-mu'minatu ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd. The believers, men and women, are supporters of each other. Ya'muruna bil ma'rufi wa yanhauna 'anil munkar. They command what is right and forbid what is wrong. وَيُطِيعُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ. And they they also established وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ وَيُطِيعُونَ
Prayer and
اللَّهَ
charity.
وَرَسُولَهُ.
Yes.
So they establish prayer and they give charity and they obey God and His Prophet. أُولَٰئِكَ سَيَرْحَمُهُمُ اللَّهُ. Those are the people who God will be merciful towards. Wallahu azizun hakim, and God is mighty wise. This verse shows that just as you might think of the commanding of right and forbidding wrong to be the domain of men, like men will go out in public and make sure that society is in order, women have that responsibility as well, because they're both spoken of. And moreover, they're said to be awliya ba'duhum al-ba'd. They are supporters and mutual, you can say, alliances of each other. So when we look for support, for example, various countries looking for support from other countries, so they're looking for a protective guardian. So this verse says that the women and men are protective guardians of each other. So to put it in this way is actually unique and ahead of its time, because we think of this complementarity to be a modern sort of thought. But this was already there in the Quran, that it's not that women depend on men, but both depend on each other. So there's a sort of mutuality. Now, in terms of establishing the prayers, I don't recall that Abu Shuqqah dwelt on this aspect so much, but it just struck me as I read his book and thought more deeply about the verse, that often it is thought that it is men's responsibility to establish the communal prayers. But here it says, that it's both the men and women who have the responsibility to establish the communal prayers.
And Dr. Shabir, he also talks about legal responsibility and how there's some sort of equality there in the Quran. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yes. When verses of the Quran deal with, you can say, criminal law, and we think of who the culprits might be. Now, often, in past societies, things were framed with male pronouns. Because that's how language worked. It was he, and now we're trying to replace it with he or she, and other ways of getting over the use of a gendered sort of language like this. But already the Quran acknowledges both men and women. So, for example, when the law is given about stealing, both as-sariqu wa as-sariqatu, the male thief and the female thief are mentioned. And so on and on, we see that the law applies to all. The laws regarding slander, if a man slanders his wife, what's the procedure to deal with this? I don't recall that Abu Shuqqah mentioned this particular aspect, but that struck me as well. The Quran gives a procedure whereby a woman will be declared innocent, or at least the charges against her would have to be dropped, meaning not so much the charges, but the accusation that is leveled against her by her husband. But the Quran does actually say, as cited by Abu Shuqqah, that if people slander chaste women, then they are deserving of punishment. So God is protecting chaste women from this kind of slander. This is mentioned in the 24th chapter of the Quran. In the 33rd chapter of the Quran, in verse number 58, there is also a clear indictment against those hypocrites in Medina, the Prophet's city, who were casting aspersions on the Muslim women. So the Quran is moving in to protect women in so many different ways.
And Dr. Shabir, sometimes we think of women being silent in public life, but the Quran has them speaking, according to Abu Shuqqah. And even if we look at those verses, we'll see that ourselves. For example, Hagar is speaking. I don't know if he mentioned Sarah, but then there was somebody else who was speaking in the Quran.
There is the woman who disputed with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Yeah.
And then there was also a woman in the Prophet's time, who said, "Where are the women?" Right? Where are the women in the Quran?
Yes.
And then Allah revealed a verse in response to her query, right?
Yes. Hagar, obviously, was not a passive...
Oh, and Mary.
And Mary, yes,
yeah,
of
we
course.
forgot to mention her.
Yeah.
She was speaking to the angels.
Yes. Hagar, the wife of Abraham in the Islamic tradition, was not a passive player in the whole scheme of things in the Islamic tradition. She declared her faith in God. God is not going to leave her and her child to perish. And of course, she ran back and forth between the hillocks to find water for her baby. And Muslim pilgrims mimic her action to this day. So she's held in high esteem, and she's shown in Islamic tradition to be an active participant. Sarah, in the Quranic version of the story, has the angels speaking to her directly, giving the news not only to Abraham, but giving the news to her as well. And so when Muslim scholars think about like what qualifies as a prophet, and they say a prophet is one to whom the angels have spoken, well, then some are inclined to include Sarah among the prophets as well. Of course.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that before.
Yeah. So it's not universal, but some scholars have thought along this line. It depends on what is your definition of a prophet. So if you define prophet as one to whom the angels have spoken to give some new information, then Sarah meets that qualification. So these are the ways in which the Quran has actually distinguished women over and above the way they were represented in previous traditions. The woman who argued with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, her story is mentioned in the 58th chapter of the Quran, which is actually named after her without mentioning her name. The surah's title is Al-Mujadala, or Al-Mujadila, the one who argued. Or the one who argues. So the verse says, the first verse of this chapter says, قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا. God has listened to the woman who was arguing with you concerning her husband. So this woman was pleading with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to establish more rights for women, especially because in her disputation with her husband, she realized that people are taking things for granted which need to be set straight by Islamic legislation, and God was weighing in on the side of women to enact new legislation by means of the Quran to protect the rights of women. And of course, much can be said about Mary and the mother of Jesus, peace be upon her, and we will continue to explore more about Mary. But the 66th chapter of the Quran does actually mention her with great honor as one who preserved her chastity, and she confirmed the words of revelation which were given to her. She too, in a way, is considered to be a prophet by some scholars because she's given some good tidings. She's spoken to directly by angels. And more can be said about her.
I mean, the book is such a treasure trove of so many different, narratives and stories that we haven't really put together in this way to show that women have these rights, right?
Yes.
Yes. It's the first time that I feel like it has been done. Yeah,
and it's good to see all of these elements being brought together, various verses of the Quran and Hadith, shedding light on neglected rights of women in Muslim societies.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiyyah and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.